We're going to have each of the gentlemen speak for 8 minutes or so. And there's no counting at the knockdowns. It'll start off with Laurence Msall from the Civic Federation, Tom Ryan, the newly elected leader of the firemen, and then Greg Hinz from Cranes, Chicago business, and many years ago, a contributor to a book I did, which probably is the reason he got that big job with Cranes.
Absolutely.
Thank you for reaffirming it. Oh, Jim. And I have one of my students here, Jim Haggerty. Stand up, Jim. Let him see a bright young man on his way up the political ladder. All right. Laurence Msall, you are up for 8 minutes. You all know the topic. Let's begin.
Thank you, Paul. I greatly appreciate this opportunity to be here, be part of this panel, talk about an issue that's of great concern to all of us at the Civic Federation. I want to thank a lot of the Civic Federation board members who are out here and support our work. The Civic Federation is a nonpartisan government research organization. We've been around for about 120 years. We primarily focus on the city of Chicago, the county of Cook, and our state of Illinois, the budget and finances related to it. I don't have to tell the people in this room, and certainly those of you who are experiencing it every day, the city of Chicago is facing an enormous financial challenge for which there are very few easy answers. There are obvious answers, but there are very few that are easy. The challenges include a structural budget deficit, an extremely high and rising debt burden, a credit rating, and this is important for all of us because I don't think we can absorb it that well living in the city and in the state of Illinois. The city of Chicago has the worst rated credit of any municipality except Detroit, any major municipality in the state of Illinois. That is a position for which no one should strive for, no one should be proud of, and no one should be happy about. It is a condition that affects all of our lives. It's affecting the ability of our government to provide basic services and the cost to taxpayers. The outside groups, nationally recognized groups that look at the condition of the city's pension funds, walk away with a startling conclusion, and that is that perhaps the city can't save its defined benefit plans. Perhaps we have gone so long without adequately funding those pension funds, not paying attention to how much more money was going out than that was going in, that perhaps those funds can't be saved. That's not something that the Civic Federation embraces. It's not something that we would encourage, but it's an important point of reference when outside groups look at it. Other states, other cities do not fund their pensions the way the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago does, with a statutory scheme that is unrelated to the actuarial requirements for those funds. Defined benefit plans require annual contributions sufficient to meet the liabilities. You cannot ignore, and many of you are well aware of the impact of compounding interest. Too few people who make decisions related to our pensions and our pension funding tend to ignore it. The current funding level for the municipal pension fund is 38%. That means we have 38 cents on the dollar for what we need to honor the promises that were made to the employees and the retirees. Before I go any further, I think it's important for all of us to recognize the employees of the city, the employees of the state of Illinois have done nothing wrong. The policemen, the firemen, the teachers, the municipal employees, the laborers, they all did what they were supposed to do. They followed the requirements of made their contributions to the pension fund, performed their work. What happened was their government let them down. The government didn't fund according to what the actuary said was necessary. Instead, we funded based on schemes or what we had available. The condition of the laborers' pension fund, which is the best fund of all the city funds, is approximately 57%, and has an unfunded liability of about $1 billion. That's the best one. That's the best funded pension. Good pensions, good governments have 100% or plus funding. If your pensions are above 70 or 75%, you can make up for it over the coming years over the trend. When you drop below 50%, there's a real question about how you're going to reverse that trend. So there's a there is some hope, right? We saw from the Civic Federation's perspective, we saw that the city of Chicago was successful in getting some pension reform for the laborers and municipal pension fund. It required joint sacrifice. It required that the employees are going to have to contribute more. The city of Chicago is going to have to contribute more. We can talk about the debate of how you make that funding happen, but you can't solve our pension crisis without recognizing that we need more money in the funds, as well as we need to reduce that unfunded liability. You reduce that unfunded liability by changing the benefits going forward, the accrued nature. There's something in many of our pension funds, the 3% compounded automatic increase. It's not a COLA. It's something much more generous than a COLA. It's not indexed to inflation. It means that in the case of the Municipal and Laborers Pension Fund, the beneficiaries after 1 year of retirement got 3% automatic compounded increase. That's a very generous benefit. It's not found in very many other governments outside of Illinois, and it's one that draws down the assets at a startling rate, especially when you're not funding them according to the actuaries. That pension reform bill for municipal and laborers is on the governor's desk. We hope the governor is going to sign it before it drops later in June. If not, it raises real questions going forward, how the city is going to meet the needs of the other major pension funds it faces, and which we're going to talk about today, the Police and Fire Pension Fund, as well as the Chicago Public Schools challenges in their own pension fund. It's important to note that the police fund is about 31% funded. It has unfunded liabilities of $7 billion. And the fireman's fund is about 25% funded. That means we have a quarter for every dollar that we need to meet the current promises that have been made, and about $3 billion in unfunded liabilities. Legislation that was passed in 2010, which increased the retirement age for police and firemen from 50 to 55, requires that the city get on a 25-year plan to get to 90% funded, which means this year in 2015, the city has to come up with approximately $600 million in new funds to meet the statutory requirement. There's been talk about bringing that amount down, or talk about the mayor has said that he would not support a 75% or almost doubling of the property tax levy just to meet the statutory requirement of police and fire without there being some pension reform. You need to know that the Chicago policemen and the Chicago firemen don't get the 3% compounded automatic increase. They're one of the few pension funds in the Chicago and Cook County and in the state of Illinois generally that don't. So when you look at changing the benefits for them, you're not going to see the level of savings that we saw with the municipal and laborers, or that we saw with the state of Illinois when they changed for the downstate and suburban teachers and for the state employees and state university employees. A key component of any reform is recognizing that the government only has so much ability to tax, so much before it starts to change the environment. But a key component is that that's where the money for the pensions comes from. In addition to the employee contributions, it has to come from the government. To talk about changing pension benefits and not creating a system that the government can actually fully fund and not make it sustainable is at best a distraction. I think all of us who care about Chicago, all of us who care about the state of Illinois, who have property here and have assets, have concerns about the level of taxation going forward that we can absorb. But also you should have concerns about how little room the government has to maneuver if it doesn't address these issues. Thank you.
Round of applause. Very good. All right, Tom, I'm sure you're happy you won that election. Go right ahead.
How do I top that? All right. Anyway, thank you to the City Club for having us here today. This is a very important topic, and there are a few things that I think that you should know that I'll go through quickly. There are very few things in this world that you can count on 100%. Every person in this room knows that when you pick up the phone and you call 911 in Chicago on possibly the worst day of your life, your house is on fire, your elderly parent has just collapsed, or your child is severely ill or injured, you will get a full response of well-trained, highly skilled firefighters and paramedics to your side to render aid within minutes. The number one function of any government is to protect its citizens, and we at the Chicago Fire Department are the best at what we do. There is no doubt about that. In fact, when Hollywood decided it was time to produce a show that spotlights what firefighters and paramedics do every day, they chose the Chicago Fire Department. There's no question about that. I've always been asked, though, by people, what about Chicago Fire don't you like? And there is only one thing that we get, one criticism we have, and that is the fact that we are much more strikingly handsome than we are portrayed on TV. So we're going to work on that, though, in coming seasons. Anyway, but this is a service, and there is a cost with any service. Our pensions were part of the contract we signed when we were first hired. The members of the Chicago Firefighters Union Local 2 put their lives on the line every day, every shift. This job takes a horrible toll on firefighters and paramedics, physically, mentally, and emotionally. We have no time to be scared. We have no option but to respond to some of the worst tragedies imaginable. We are the ones that are expected to bring calm and order to a chaotic situation. We cannot afford to have a bad day. It is our sworn duty to protect Chicago citizens, and we do so every day. But today we're here to talk about pensions. We know that Mayor Emanuel inherited this problem when he took office, but the pension dilemma is nothing new. Records show that our firefighters' pension fund has been underfunded since 1931. The highest our pension fund has ever been funded was 62%, and that was for a very short time back in the 90s. And as Laurence said earlier, we're at 25% now, the lowest of all the funds. However, our firefighters' pension fund has done a masterful job managing this fund over the years despite the chronic underfunding problem, and they have averaged nearly 10% return on investment for the last 28 years. Last year alone, they earned 22%. Imagine if we actually had some funds to invest, what kind of money we could have, okay? And they were ranked number 2 nationally among all public pension funds last year. Since it's obvious that our fund is at an unacceptable funding level, many suggestions have been made, how do we best right this financial ship? When it was created a few years back to begin a dialogue on ways to fix our broken pension system, Mayor Daley's commission to strengthen Chicago's pension funds found that our benefits are not really the problem. I actually served on that commission with Laurence Msall here, my fellow panelist. This commission found that Chicago firefighters and paramedics do not receive excessive benefits. They concluded that the underfunding problem exists solely because the city never put in enough money to meet actuarial requirements. The commission report also revealed that Chicago firefighters and paramedics pay more into their pension than most other major large cities, yet we receive less. Now, I was always told that punishment should be reserved for those who have actually done something wrong. So why are we looking to punish those that have done the right thing all along? We have had 9 1/8 of our salaries, the largest in the city, taken directly from our checks ever since we were hired, our first paycheck. Our pension is our retirement. Any proposed reduction of current benefits would place an unfair burden on many of our members who have spent their entire careers risking their lives protecting the Chicago citizens. And many of these people are suffering greatly in their retirements from the injuries, illnesses, and maladies that are a direct result of the service to the citizens of Chicago. But here are some things about our pension fund that you may not know. Laurence did touch on a few of these. The city of Chicago does not pay Social Security for firefighters and paramedics, and we do not get Social Security for the work that we do. The city does not pay workman's compensation for our members, nor does the city pay Medicare for members who were hired before 1986. Besides paying for the retirements of our members, our pension fund also pays for all the survivor benefits for the families of our line of duty deaths. We've had 5 firefighters killed in the line of duty just since December of 2010. And because we don't have workman's comp, the fund must also absorb all the costs related to duty and occupational disabilities. I should note, though, that right now our disabilities are at an all-time low. The truth is that the men and women of the Chicago Fire Department fight to get back to work. Our fund pays for all our widow and widowers' annuities. Did you know that we currently have over 600 widows that live on $1,000 a month? Try living on $12,000 a year in this city or any city. Our widows and widowers also do not receive a cost of living adjustment, and they must pay for their health care. That doesn't go very far on $12,000. Now, many of those out there who are against defined benefit plans have argued that it is the COLA, or the cost of living adjustment, that is to blame for the underfunding problem. What many of you probably don't know, that most pensioners in Illinois have received a 3% compounded COLA. But Chicago firefighters and paramedics receive a flat or simple COLA. They are not compounded. And did you know that nearly every active and Chicago firefighter and paramedic working today will receive only 1.5% COLA, which is flat. It does not begin until they hit age 60, and it is capped at 20 years. We are already tiered, and we have been for several years, even before the crisis emerged. So firefighters and paramedics have done our part by consistently making our contributions, and the pension board has routinely exceeded their investment goals. That leaves only one piece of this puzzle that does not fit. The city has not made the proper contributions over many years to meet the actual cost of making our pension funds healthy. The plain truth is we have not caused this problem. Actuarial companies like Aon and Gabriel Roeder Smith have agreed that lack of contribution caused the problem, and that the only way to fix it is to adopt an actual required contribution system, which is needed instead of the woefully inadequate multiplier system that we now use. What the fire department pension fund and all other city funds need is a steady and consistent and permanent revenue stream. Now, we all know that no one wants a tax increase, so we have looked at many options that try to fix this problem. For example, the city could issue pension obligation bonds and bring all the funds to 50%, and then employ an ARC system from that point forward. But you ask yourself, how do we pay for it? Possibilities include future casino revenue. It has been mentioned that there may be a financial transaction tax considered on stocks traded in Chicago. And there have even been some that have called to totally eliminate the TIF funds. But we also know that this program does provide economic stimulus to blighted areas in Chicago, and it's very necessary for people who are looking to survive. And maybe it's just a simple restructuring and reallocation of some of those unused funds may be in order. In closing, we are here to help solve the problem in a fair and equitable manner for all. We are willing to listen, but the pension is a contract. Our pension is a contract, and according to Illinois state law, that contract cannot be impaired or diminished. And I have to ask you and everyone else in this room, if you can break our contract, our pension contract, then why can we not break the parking meter deal or the Skyway contract? Okay, I mean, that to me, I'm totally puzzled by this. Our pension was part of our contract when we were first hired, and we believe that our retirement contract with the city should not be broken. And I thank you for your time.
Very good. Okay, Greg, bring us together by combining those two things into an answer. I'm sure you can do it.
Absolutely, Paul. A fact about me that didn't make it into your
My
book.
lengthy introduction?
Didn't make it into your book. My grandfather was a Chicago firefighter on the southwest side. Julius Hinz, and thank you, Mom and Dad, for not naming me after my paternal grandfather. Julius Hinz lived in Marquette Park. I was pretty young when he died, but kind of an old, gruff German type who, if family legend is right, made a really mean batch of bathtub gin back in the days when you needed to do that. I'm sure he depended, and my grandmother depended on his pension. But I have to tell you, he'd shake his head at the situation. You really want to scare yourself, scare the kids. Pick up a copy and read the Fireman's Annuity and Benefit Fund of Chicago's latest comprehensive annual financial report. It's really scary, and it kind of provides some answers as to how we got to where we are. And the bottom line is nobody's in white here. It's all shades of gray. Everybody's got dirt on their hands. At the moment, this is as of December 31st, 2012, the last audit figures that are available. The fund had accrued liabilities of about $4.1 billion, but only had $993 million to pay it off. In other words, they're $3 billion short of what they need to pay it off, to pay the benefits that have been promised. The funded ratio, that's a fancy term. It means the ratio between what you owe and what you pay has never been good. He's right. It's never been higher than the 60s. But just in the last 5 years, between 2007 and 2012, the funded ratio has dropped from 43% to 24.71%. If it keeps going that way, guess what? In a few years, within a decade, we're not going to have the money to pay current operating costs, like benefits, and somebody's going to be short. If that happens, that's called insolvency. Okay, how do we get to where we're at? The union is absolutely correct that the city has not put in what was actuarially required. To read from the audited financial report, in 2007, the city was required to put in $188 million. It put in $72 million, $100 million difference. Same in 08, same in 09, 10, 11, and 12. And only gets worse. In 2012, we were required actuarially to put in $271.5 million. We, the taxpayers, put in $81.5 million. $300 million short of what we legally owe, pending lawsuits, just in 1 year. In other words, put a different way, we put in 30% of what we were supposed to. So the statement that the government hasn't put in what it said it would put in the contracts is absolutely right. It hasn't. Money got spent on other things. What are those other things? Running city government, paying bills, paying salary raises. At the same time that salaries have been going up, the legislature, which determines pension rates in Illinois, has, through the years, sweetened the benefits. Ergo, in 2007, the average annuitant, the average retiree in this system got a pension of $52,446. By 2012, that figure, and you know what happened in 2009 and 2010 and 2011 to the rest of the society, we had huge financial problems. By 2012, the average annuity was $64,860. That's an increase of $12,000 or 24% in just 5 years. Now, if you are increasing your expenses 25% a quarter every 5 years, you're going to have a problem. So that's the other side of the coin. The average age of retirement for firefighters is 58 and a half. That's not a coincidence. To max out your benefit, it takes 30 years. While you can retire at age 50, after 20 years of experience, you don't get the full benefit. To get the full benefit, you have to work 30 years. Figure the average firefighter starts at 25, 26, 27, something like that. Average age of retirement in 2012, 58.5. Average years of experience, 30.4. Average salary, $104,000. Some people in the private sector, particularly most of you who probably don't have pensions anymore, might say that's awfully generous. I'm sure that labor would reply that, hey, you made a promise, you made a deal, you ought to keep the deal. But ultimately, the benefit levels and compensation levels awarded to public sector employees cannot exceed that of the society as a whole. Ultimately, they have to kind of be the same, or there's going to be resentment, political tensions, and whatever. What I'm trying to leave you with is the sense that to get out of this fix, it ain't going to be easy. It's going to require compromise on both sides. Somebody's going to have to pay. There's going to have to be a lot of pain that goes around. And accomplishing it is going to be really difficult. Look at the plan that was floated by the mayor to pay off, to restructure 2 other city funds for laborers and white-collar workers, the municipal funds. An agreement was reached with the unions. A funding mechanism was developed to increase property taxes, and ever since there's been no end of howling and yelling and screaming, most of which is just politics, but the most difficult of which involves Governor Quinn, who has to sign off on this puppy, but the governor's in a political spot right now. If he signs the bill, he looks like a hypocrite because he's basing his campaign in part on giving everybody a tax refund check. So what, he's going to give money to people so they can turn around and give it around? But if he doesn't sign it, the city maybe goes over a fiscal cliff, and the mayor is absolutely furious. I wish I could say that I saw signs of more rationality coming from the other candidate for governor. That would be Bruce Rauner. Mr. Rauner wants to move everybody to a 401k, just like has happened in the private sector, and I understand why he wants to do it. What he's not telling you, though, is that he's laid out conditions which makes it almost unaffordable. For instance, Mr. Rauner wants to accept police and fire unions from any kind of changes. He says they're special; they put their lives on the line. So we're not going to give them the same deal we give librarians and teachers and everybody else. Secondly, he says that those 3% compounded COLAs everybody gets every year. Consider this for a minute. Inflation now is running 1 or 2% a year. It has been for some years. It's probably going to for some more years more. That means that every one of the last few years, everybody who gets that 3% compound COLA has had a real increase in their pension. It's not that they're just being held even. They're moving ahead because they're getting more than inflation would give them. Anyhow, Mr. Rauner says that if you've gotten that 3% COLA, it's going to apply from now on to everybody based on what they've accrued so far. What that means is he's taken the big cost-saving mechanism off the table so that $100 billion in unfunded liability in the state pension funds that you keep hearing about is real. Well, how is he going to pay it? If you take the revenue stream that now goes to pay current retirees and instead you put it over into 401ks for current city workers, how are you going to pay off all the other stuff you've already accrued? He hasn't told us that. Well, maybe they'll tell us that later, maybe not. That's politics. He's trying to get elected. But again, what I want to leave you with here is this is a terrible problem, but everybody, all sides to one degree or another, are culpable. We can point fingers and say who's guiltier, who's sinned more than anybody else, but everybody has sinned. That means the only way out is to work it out where everybody pays.
Okay, that brought us together with a lot of cheer. If you have a question, Jack, you raise your hand. Hand it over to Jack. And while Jack is downstream getting questions, that's for all of you members of the parade. Yeah, thank you, Father, for being one of the. I needed that. The moderator, who, as you all know, is the white line down the middle of the road. Blame is easy. Solutions are tough. So, leaving aside all the stuff that's happened, when the Titanic hit the iceberg, no one was really seriously discussing breakfast the following morning. So, the reality is that something has to be done. And if all sides can't agree on one thing, I think, as Laurence Msall says, sooner or later, poof, the funds are gone. So, compromise is, it's not so easy anymore. The mayor says everyone's got to put some skin in the game. Starting with you, Laurence, and take no more than 30 seconds, maybe a minute, I'll be generous. If you could be the decider, that guy's no longer running things, but if you could be the decider, crowd's slow, Mark. The crowd, thank you, Will. You're going to be a great legislator. You picked up on it. You see why you kicked butt in that district. How would you decide this? And none of you are elected officials. Tommy, you've just been elected, so you're still in your honeymoon. Go ahead. How would you decide it? Right down the line.
For just
For all of it.
Well, let me just start with the police and fire pension fund.
Good.
Right? I
Do
think
that.
you have to look at the fact that you have this pension fund that has benefits that are different than we offer other similar employees that are all paid at the end of the day by the same governments, right? So it doesn't make any sense that the Chicago police and firemen are provided a benefit that is more affordable than what we provide to the downstate and suburban pension funds. We can't continue to have so many units of pension funds. Well-managed states, well-managed pension funds don't have the level of complexity that we do in Illinois. Why do we have a separate benefit for elected officials? Why wouldn't we, those elected officials, get the same benefit? If you want to give part-time employees a pension benefit, why wouldn't you give them the same benefit you give your other employees? My point is this: we need to consolidate all the police and fire pension funds in the state of Illinois, hold them to the same standard, hold them to the same requirements, and then you can basically get away from the insider dealings of inflationary tactics that try to push responsibility for funding the pension fund off to someone else. It would be much more accountable. It would be the best path. But that's going to require additional money from the state of Illinois. The most obvious place, and I believe Governor Quinn raised this when he was here speaking, is the municipal share of the state income tax. If we're going to make this temporary income tax continue or permanent, there's really no justification for not helping the local governments. That basically, if that took place, about 10%, well, actually it is 10% of all of the income tax increase up until the point we did the temporary increase went to local governments. If that was continued, that would raise, if you decide to continue the temporary income tax increase, you're talking about freeing up approximately $150 million in new revenue for the city of Chicago. That would help fund this. Or it could be
All right.
used
Lawrence,
statewide.
you're 1 minute. You could be a professor. That's normally what professors do. How would you like to see this resolved? I know you're in a tough spot because you don't want to give anything in, unlike Ms. Lewis yesterday, who was so conciliatory. Go ahead.
Listen, once again, and I will repeat what I said earlier, we are already tiered on the Chicago Fire Department. Nearly every active firefighter and paramedic today is already going to get a 1.5% COLA, whereas everybody else in the state gets a 3% compounded. We get a 1.5% flat, okay? I don't know how much more we can give, quite honestly. And you know what? Every time that bell rings, we respond. And as I said, there's very few things in this world that you can count on 100%. You count on us every time. So I believe that my firefighters and paramedics have earned every dime they make and every dime they're going to get in retirement. And that's the end of the story.
Mr. Hinz.
Let me answer it this way. I think it's incumbent on people in public office and our leaders, if they're going to declare a crisis, we're in a crisis, we've got a problem, well, then you have to act like we're really in a crisis and put some skin in the game yourself. Ergo, why, at a time when the state is having huge problems paying its bills, we've asked workers to take it, older people who need their money to take less. Why are we talking about spending $100 billion in limited state money for a presidential library for Barack Obama? I mean, I like the president. I wish his library was here, but we can't afford to put in taxpayer money. Let him hit up some of his rich friends. You know, and every time public officials do things like this, it makes people who are asked to take sacrifices say, why aren't you taking a sacrifice? I think Mayor Emanuel, to some degree, is guilty of that. We all know the huge uproar that occurred in this town when we closed lots of schools, dozens of schools this last summer, largely for economic reasons. They've said it's academic reasons, but money is certainly part of the mix. So where all of a sudden does the mayor all of a sudden find lots of money to build lots of new schools on the north side in his political base just before an election? What does that do to his moral authority? If you want to ask people to sacrifice, you have to sacrifice yourself.
All right. Good question. Now we're going to go real fast. We got a lot of heavy hitters asking questions, but since this is the City Club, and we treat everybody the same because the moderator is such a fair and honest man. Born and raised in the 39th Ward. You remember tell Margie. Here we go. Tony McIntosh, where are you? Raise your hand. There you go. For firemen and police pension, why not tax 911 calls? Anybody? Don't jump at once.
You could. Some suburbs do. If you use a public safety kind of service, you get hit up for it. That might work if you have people who have money. What if you're dealing with a poverty family, a poor family whose house is on fire? They're going to have to choose between calling 911 to say rescue my house and not feeding their kids.
All right, I think that's a fairly straightforward answer. Jerry, boy, is it Quandit? What? Quant? Unwind Chicago. Karen, you're going to like this question. Karen Lewis outlined a variety of pension solutions yesterday here at the City Club. The most compelling of her is her LaSalle Street tax. How viable do you see this possible solution to the problem? Lawrence, why don't you take that? You're close.
So the idea basically being that we would provide $1. My understanding is $1 per transaction at the exchanges, and that would be absorbed by the people buying the contracts and not drive those exchanges out of town. There's some significant stumbling blocks. I think it requires state action, right? There's a state law now in place that prohibits the tax of contracts at the exchanges. You would have to override it. We found Springfield to be a very slow-moving place in terms of getting action, whether it's on figuring out what it's going to do with its own income tax, what it's doing with its own budget. But I think also there is a real need to be sensitive to where the state of Illinois is. If you look at where we are in terms of economic growth, if you look at the city of Chicago in terms of where we are in terms of economic attractiveness, needs to be a real study and analysis of how this tax would actually apply, and how what people who make statements that it's not going to drive business out of the city of Chicago. I would need to see that actual proposal. I need to see the evidence that it's not going to drive it away, because intuitively we know that we have seen a transformation of the activities in those exchanges as it goes to a much more electronically based activity, and that is portable. And it's not portable in the sense that that I'm saying that they will all move, but they could, and that the impact could be dramatic if we go forward with a tax proposal that some understand, but not that we haven't seen all the full implications of.
Okay. I'm going to save your questions because he just answered. Mark Warmiller. Where are you, Mark? Raise your hand. There he is. Hey, you're moving on up, and remember, he's a Republican. This shows you how open we are here. Here we go. Mark Warmiller. Pension solution on new employees. Why not go IRAs or 401ks on Social Security or new employees to start a phase out of the unsustainable system?
We've already done that. Everybody hired, at least at the state level, everybody hired after January 1st of 2011 has been put into a new tier with reduced benefits. It's not quite a 401k, but it's a much downsized pension over time with much reduced benefits.
I would also have to add, then who's going to pay for the current retirees? Because if you start phasing out, if there's no longer anyone, you put people in 401ks and Social Security, they're no longer contributing to the defined benefit plan, then who's going to pay for the plan? So I mean, I think there's flaws in that design.
Moderator never gets involved, but you're absolutely right.
Well, I think another point that needs to be understood is that if you're not covered by Social Security and the police pensions are not, the employees are not covered, to provide them only a 401k type of coverage would not be viewed by most experts as a adequate sort of pension or retirement benefit planning. Also, I want to use this opportunity to talk about something that the Civic Federation has proposed in terms of addressing this, and that's the fact that the state of Illinois exempts, unlike the federal government, unlike most of the surrounding states, every penny that anyone earns in retirement income, right? So that in the federal government taxes your retirement income, just as if it was income from any source. In Illinois, it's exempt. That is worth billions of dollars in lost revenue to the state of Illinois. The Civic Federation doesn't support tax increases in the abstract. We look at tax increases or we look at tax proposals and say, what are you going to do with that money?
Boy,
If
you
it's-
want to tax old people? You better not run for governor.
Right. Well, if those who believe that we haven't been funding the pensions adequately, and those who believe that the taxpayers are the ones who ultimately pay the price, the notion that we're now going to let the people who didn't make their adequate tax payments be exempt from that taxation, or that the people who have the greatest stake in it, those people with those the retirement benefit, aren't sharing in the cost of the government going forward, is a missed opportunity.
Well, you're not going to run in Central Illinois, I can tell you that. All right, you're going to run. Karen Lewis. She's right there. I guess this is to Mr. Msall? Okay. Why, Laurence, I'll soften it a little. Why did members of your organization actively ask the bond rating agencies to lower Chicago's bond ratings? It's as if your organization is trying to sabotage the city. Kind of a moderate question for you, Laurence.
Well, it requires a couple of clarifications, and I think the president of the Teachers Union needs to understand the difference between the Civic Federation and the Commercial Club of Chicago. We're separate entities. Civic Federation we have a lot of crossover membership, but and so the issue, which is about the rating agencies and you attempting to use the rating agencies as the lever to get government to pay attention to what's going on, I think was really what the comments by the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club's president when he talked about the rating agencies, trying to get them to help push the government. And I believe their intentions were very good. They wanted to, they want, like all of us, want our government to reform and to move forward. And so the fact that we haven't found anything yet in Illinois to get our government to fully absorb the need for pension reform, to have a balanced budget and a long-term financial plan is really what that was drawn from.
Okay, very good. Two more questions. Alderman Joe Moore, fighting 49th. Please comment, this is to everybody, please comment on some of the alternatives to the property tax that have been proposed to fill the pension fund gap, i.e. financial transactions tax, I think we covered that, a traffic congestion fee, a city income tax, a casino, elimination of TIFs, or letting the city club run the city. Oh, I just added that on. Sorry.
I'm going to throw another one on the table that Alderman Riley talked about a few days ago in his proposal. This comes from a former senior TIF official for the city of Chicago who notes correctly that a good number of our really heavy dollar-producing TIF districts are about to expire in the next 4 or 5 years. And his idea is essentially when a TIF district expires, the money raised goes back in the normal tax pot. So most of it will go to the schools, but the city will get about a quarter of it. And his idea was, well, rather than just let that go in $10 or $20 million a year chunks into the city budget and get wasted, spent away the way all money is spent at City Hall, let's take that revenue stream and put it in a special pot, segregate it just for pensions so that we have this crisis, and use that money to float some bonds so that we can kind of recapitalize some of our pension funds. And over time, you're talking at least several $1 billion either for the city or Board of Education. I think it's borrowing, but it's secure borrowing, and I think it ultimately has the potential to save money. If I were at City Hall, I'd listen to the alderman and take a real close look at that idea.
I also, the one other thing that I had touched on briefly is the casino that we had talked about. Everyone, I don't know if everyone in this room realizes, but the Des Plaines Casino that has roughly 1,000 seating positions, maybe 1,200, brings in $30 million a month. I mean, that's real money. And I know that obviously this is going to take doings down in Springfield, which, as everyone on this panel will agree, the wheels move very slowly down there. But that is certainly something that needs to be considered. We watch money go north of the border in Des Plaines, We watch it go south of the border into Hammond. I think that it's about time that we wake up and realize that we've got to get something done here because that could help eliminate some of the burden that we're under right now.
Before we go jumping into a casino as the answer to every question we have in terms of our government financial challenges, I think we have to look at the fact that, okay, how much tax revenue are all the casinos in the state of Illinois generating? What if we built a casino as big as all 10 of the casinos that exist in Illinois? How much money could that generate? Well, it's still going to generate less than the amount of the contribution owed just for the municipal and fire. That's $600 million. So we're not opposed to talking about casinos as part of an entertainment strategy, but if it was part of a strategy, could you tell us what the strategy is? Could you tell us where the casino is going to be located before you build it? Could you tell us who's going to get the money and how it's going to be used? Casinos are an inherently unreliable source of government financing. And when we're jumping at TIFs and we're jumping at casinos, what we're doing is we're trying to find the easy answer that isn't straightforward with people that how we're going to fund our government. And too often we see, and the last proposal that we saw in Springfield actually had the state taking in less money by the time they paid off the racetracks and they paid off the existing casinos and they paid off the other gambling interests so that we could have yet another 2 more casinos in the state of Illinois. If we're going to pursue it, if you're going to advocate it, at least let's get the details out before they pass the bill in Springfield so that we know exactly what it is. I don't personally think it's the way that is going to solve our financial crisis. Is it going to take away, again, just like the LaSalle Street tax idea proposed, is it going to take away business from the rest of the entertainment districts in the city? Or is it going to be an accentuating fact? It's going to bring people from far away to come to Chicago? Or is it going to just move the gamblers around the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois that are gambling already? I just would urge caution that $30 million, which is a lot of money being generated from the Rivers Casino, is not enough to even begin stabilizing our pension funds.
All right. Some of you chronologically challenged folks may remember many decades ago, Tom Donovan remembers, remember the lottery? It was going to solve the education crisis. Yeah. Yeah. Of course, I went around the state telling him it's going to help, but it goes in the same pot. I mean, got booed many places. I know you guys can't believe that. All right, last question. We have a question that's unsigned, and you know the rule. If you can't have enough guts to sign your name, your question's not asked. As simple as that. Alan, what's your last name? Scott. Alan, handwriting is a problem. This may not be your last name. Maybe we have the beginning father of, they're playing hanky-panky. I'll ask the question. You got to raise your hand before I finish. Wisconsin, Indiana, or Michigan? Now, who wrote that? That's the first 3 words. Boy. Hate to throw in Shakespeare, but cowards die many times before their deaths, but the valiant taste death but once. I mean, it's a good question. We'll let it ride. Wait till Will gets to Springfield. He'll clear it up. Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan have lowered income taxes and are stealing our jobs. Why can't pension benefits for public employees be lowered to the level of private employees? Alan, after hearing all this, who refuses to raise his hand? Anyone?
I'll take a crack at it. Because we, the people, through our government, and the Board of Education, and the City of Chicago, and the State of Illinois, signed a contract with workers saying that if you do this, we'll do that. Such a thing is not necessarily inviolate. The core question is before the Illinois Supreme Court right now as to whether you can break that contract, but you can't just snap your fingers and walk away from it. It's not that easy.
Any other closing comment?
I would say this, too. I like the fact that you're bringing up what's going on in Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, other places. You're seeing economic growth in those states. It's more straightforward than looking at actual income tax rate or anything else. They have stabilized their finances. As long as the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois has not figured out a way so that the rating agencies, so any casual observer looks, how are we going to fund the government? What's our tax policy going forward? You are not going to see that type of economic growth. You're not going to see businesses investing in the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago because they don't know what the return on their investment is going to be. The best economic development tool the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago could have would be a stable financial situation, one that does not rely on borrowing. And I have to take exception with the idea that we should use TIF funds and borrow against the TIF funds by issuing bonds that will then be paid off by somebody later who will find an easier way to make the payments than the people right now. That's how we got into this mess in a large part. The city of Chicago is right now borrowing money for its operating expenses and scooping and tossing its way into a very dangerous situation. We need to deal, as was basically said, we have a crisis. We need to deal objectively and use real math and use real accounting and actuarial standards on how we fund our pensions going forward.
Whoa.
And you and I disagree.
Got more confidence in their ability to borrow.
I just want to take this opportunity once again to thank City Club for giving us for opening up this forum for everyone to come and share their ideas and their thoughts. As far as my members are concerned, they have a sworn duty that they are to respond to whatever they're called to respond to. And part of that duty, part of that contract, when they signed up, myself 29 years ago, was the fact that when we can no longer do this job, that we will be able to live with some kind of dignity in retirement. And if you're going to try, after 29 years of service, to come back and try and take what we've earned away from us, we have a problem with that, okay? And we're going to fight. We are reasonable. We are certainly willing to listen. We want to be part of the solution, but we certainly don't want to be the bulk of the solution. And that's all I have to say.
How about a great round of applause? Very educational.